Felicia's struggling to talk today. Why isn't this episode 100, take 4? If you've been following me on Instagram lately, you'll know that I've been working a lot with Sony Australia. I'm not an ambassador, I'm not an affiliate, I'm not anything like that. They've just been kind enough to take me on board for a couple of videos, and they've been kind enough to also lend me an A7S Mark III before it comes out, which isn't nerve-wracking at all. Maybe you'll hear from the live stream with Sony Australia, which would have happened a couple of hours before this video went live. If so, welcome. Hi. Now, considering the low light capabilities of this camera, we wanted to test it using a low light scenario by lighting a scene using only candles. Well, we also had a practical light in the background, and we had a light coming through the window to act as moonlight, but both of those were accent lights. In terms of key lights, we used candles. Let's watch the scene and then we'll talk. Alrighty, so this is what we started with. It's a fairly small space, there's a fair bit of furniture in the way, but it's intimate, and I think it can work to our advantage because it's quite deep. It means we can create depth in our lighting as well. The first step was to cover the couches. Now, we did that using black and white fabric, and we did it strategically. We made sure that we had white fabric either side of the action, which was going to happen on the rug in the foreground, and then we made sure that there was black fabric at the background so that our character, our ghost character, didn't get lost in the background. The white fabric on the sides also acted as reflection. Then we set the Lupo Actionpanel full color through the window to act as a little bit of moonlight. We tried a few different settings. It took a little bit of tinkering to work out, but we ended up settling on color temperature instead of using the presets. Going through the presets, there were a couple of different options that we had in terms of a bluish look, but none of them were quite right. They were a little bit too saturated for what we needed, but it's really cool that a light like this has those presets and then has full HSI as well as full color temperature, full spectrum color. That is so helpful in these sort of circumstances where you're not too sure what sort of color setting you want to achieve what you want, and you have all those options there laid out in front of you. No need for gels. Anyway, we went through the presets, we found a few blues, we tried them out, they were a bit too blue, and then we thought, well, we're shooting at 3200 Kelvin on the camera, which means our daylights will be pushed towards the blue. So what if we just make the color of the light in CCT mode, in the color temperature mode, more than daylight? We make it like 69,000 or 7,000 Kelvin. That should push it far enough into the blue to make it look a little bit more like that stereotypical Hollywood moonlight, and it worked. Another thing about this light is it's super duper powerful, and considering that the inside we weren't really using that much light, we're just using candles, so we have to balance that equally to make it not be overpowering in the background, which meant that we had to bring it down to 1%. And even that was edging on too bright. Speaking of color, I do want to touch on the color science of the A7S Mark III, which is improved. It is really nice looking compared to older models. I used to have an A7R Mark II, and I've got to be honest, the colors in that were very hard to work with. It was just very hard to get it looking nice. There were just extra steps involved, and that took time. But it's actually starting to look really nice. It's actually making me consider whether I should change back to Sony. I think I have a gear problem. Right, so now it's time to start filming. We didn't really have that many complicated shots. There were maybe 2 shots that were a little bit more complicated. There was a gimbal shot, which was our opening shot that we were going to use, a track in or a track out. I wasn't really sure which one I wanted, so I did both. And then we also had like this pan up transition shot, so it was like feet to midsection and then midsection to face. That didn't really work in the edit, so we ended up working our way around that, but we really only had a handful of shots to do, so it was kind of contained, really easy to do. As with most things, it was nice to start with that wide shot, that establishing shot, that track in. That allows us to kind of see where everything is placed, where all the lights are coming from, and if we wanted to modify that in the close-ups, we could. Now, aside from me needing to brush up on my gimbal work, I think this shot worked really well. There was a couple of issues with a little bit of focus, but then again, we were throwing a lot of curveball curveballs of this camera. Our actor, our character, doesn't have a face. They are wearing glasses and they're a white sheet, so it doesn't really pick up eye autofocus on that, coupled with the fact that we're shooting in very dark conditions. In other tests with the camera, I've found that the eye autofocus is spot on. It's really quick and responsive, and you can actually change the responsiveness in the settings, which is a really nifty feature. Do I think that autofocus is something that filmmakers should use pretty much all the time? No, I don't think autofocus is going to replace a focus puller. There's something so organic about focus pulling that it's just much better when it's done manually. But when it comes to situations like this, where you're the only shooter and you're maybe using a gimbal and you don't have the ability to do that manual focus, then it's a godsend. There were also moments with close focus where the camera was having trouble trying to pick up close details. In those cases, I ended up just using the touch focus on the touch screen at the back, and sometimes even the back focus button, to just try and kick it into gear and get it focused on what I wanted. I had a few reflectors on standby because I thought maybe we might need them to get a little bit more level into our scene. I didn't end up using them. I didn't need them at all. We did shoot this scene at 16,000 ISO, which is insane. The camera's native ISO is 640, and I did find, I will note here, that it was kind of hit and miss in between 640 and 16,000, but then at 16,000 it kind of cleared up again. I found that other people have mentioned that as well, so I think I'm on the right track in thinking that maybe it is kind of like a dual ISO, even though it's not advertised as one. I'm not really sure. But I do recommend, if you're shooting high ISO, you'd probably want to go 16,000 and then stop down, which is what I did. If I needed to change the exposure down, I would just stop down instead of changing the ISO, because in doing that you will change the noise pattern, and I didn't want to do that. The direction of the candles and the light didn't have to change either, which is something else I thought I'd have to do. I thought I'd have to move the candle around to get more level out of them or change the direction, but because of the size of the camera, I could put it effectively wherever I wanted. I could handhold it and the IBIS would kick in and produce a really nice stable shot as long as I was holding it correctly. Obviously, you still need to think about your pose, your stance when you're using a camera handheld like that, but I found it really easy to use. I found it really nice to get into the nooks and crannies and get the shots looking the way that I wanted them very easily. All in all, I gotta say that those images are fairly usable at 16,000 ISO. Would I do it all the time? No. But is this feature useful? Hell yeah. There have been a few times in my career where this sort of thing would have come in really handy. I may have been on a job where there isn't enough money to get enough lights to shoot an exterior nighttime scene and the shots are all grainy and yucky. It would have been nice to have an option with a really highly sensitive camera like that to be able to get a less noisy image and spend less time in post-production trying to fix that up. So in short, Sony, I'm impressed. I have a few more videos coming out about the Sony a7S Mark III. They're less on the technical side and more on the practical side, because that's what I like to focus on here. I don't really like to get too bogged down in the tech specs. If you do like that sort of stuff, you can check out some links down below to my favorite videos which outline tech specs, because I love tech specs. I think they're really interesting, and I come from a technical background, so I know and understand that people like that stuff. It's all linked down below. So thank you, Sony Australia, and thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed that video, and I'll see you next time.